Welcome to Canada's most irreverent talk show. This is the Andrew Lawton Show, brought to you by True North.
Coming up, a real Canadian spy story. I speak with author and former CSIS officer Andrew Kirsch.
The Andrew Lawton Show starts right now.
Hello and welcome to you all. This is the Andrew Lawton Show here on True North, Canada's most irreverent talk show. Going to do things a little bit different on this program. Every now and then, a book comes along that I feel just a little 10-minute interview at the end of a show is not enough to delve into, and I want to take a little bit of time with it, with the author, and I wanted to do that today. I read a couple of weeks ago a book called I Was Never Here, My True Canadian Spy Story of Coffees, Codenames, and Covert Operations in the Age of Terrorism. It's written by Andrew Kirsch, who is not just a former CSIS officer, but also a former fellow political candidate, and he now runs a security consulting firm, so he does lots of great stuff. And interestingly enough, CSIS, I've always had an interest in intelligence and law enforcement and security, because I'm a bit of a nerd like this. But CSIS is not an organization or an agency that is all that well known by Canadians. I think a lot of people would shrug their shoulders and say, see what? See, like Canada doesn't have a spy agency, or if we do, it's not one that does anything. And it does do a lot, and they have had a very critical role to play in several incidents that have come up. But as always, Canada tends to live in the shadow of the United States and other countries around the world. And the book does, I think, an interesting job of talking about Andrew's own experiences going through this, but also the role that CSIS plays in Canada. And I thought it was an interesting read and thought perhaps you might believe that as well. So it's my great privilege to talk to Andrew Kirsch, former CSIS officer and now author of the book I Was Never Here, My True Canadian Spy Story of Coffees, Codenames, and Covert Operations in the Age of Terrorism. Andrew, good to talk to you. Thanks for coming on today.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
This is, I think, a fascinating book for a number of reasons that we'll get into, but I think the existence of the book itself is unique because, as I understand it, and you talked about this in the book a little bit, no one else who's gone through what you went through working for CSIS has done this, has written about that experience, whereas I can just name off the top of my head like 5 books from former CIA officers in the United States.
Well, it seems like there's a bunch of books a week from CIA, FBI, and no, we haven't had a CSIS book from somebody who worked at CSIS about the experience of working for CSIS. There have been books that have come out, policy books or people commenting on said public policy or threats, but not about the experience itself, like what it's like to work at CSIS and be a Canadian spy.
Why was it that you wrote the book? Because I got from you talking about it that there was a little bit of a catharsis in wanting to unpack your experiences of being there and living through this for a number of years, but it also seemed like you wanted to promote, if that's the right word, the organization itself, or at least demystify the organization.
Well, I said, I hope the book was not intended to talk anybody into or out of working there, but it was to talk about my experience. And when I signed up in 2005 and looked into what it would be like, there's nothing out there. And I get, now that I'm out and I'm public about it, I get asked a lot of questions from people who are applying, interested, have no idea that Canada has spies, about what it is and what they do. And I can tell you from my experience when I was knocking on doors every day, and I write about this in the book, and I say, hello, my name is Andrew and I'm here from CSIS and I need your help. Like, no one has any idea what CSIS is, what it does, why we're there, what we want. And so I just felt like it's important more people know about it. One, for the folks who are applying and want to know what they're getting themselves into when they run away and join the circus, and also from the Canadians who are being asked for help or who might be aware of concerns. Like, this is what we're worried about. These are the people who are worried about it. And it's okay to help them. Like, they're real people.
So let's actually strip it down to the basics for people. What is CSIS? And to engage in that longstanding Canadian pastime of comparisons with the U.S., how does it differ from American intelligence and law enforcement agencies that Canadians are probably more familiar with?
Well, that's it. We often get compared, and it's not a great comparison. So we have the Canadian Security Intelligence Service is Canada's domestic security service, and it is mandated to investigate threats to the security of Canada. And there are 4 threats, and they are espionage and sabotage, foreign influence activities, terrorism, and subversion. And so we're closely compared to the CIA, but it's not a great comparison. CIA operates abroad, whereas Canada, we are a domestic service. And then they say, well, you must be the FBI, but the FBI is law enforcement and will bring charges. And that is more aligned with our RCMP. So we're closer to the British model, which is a foreign intelligence service, the MI6, James Bond running around, and MI5, which operates domestically, Mossad and Shin Bet, and Australia has ASIO and ASIS. So we're in that model, but we don't have a foreign service. That's the big difference, is that we only have a domestic security service, not a foreign intelligence service.
And even then, the domestic service is relatively young in Canada. A lot of this all used to be done under the banner of the RCMP within that law enforcement purview.
That's right. That's right. So this all came about kind of shortly after the War Measures Act in the problems in the 70s, where the RCMP was responsible for law enforcement and intelligence. And the decision was made to separate those functions in the 80s, early 80s, to create a domestic security service, which was a separate function from law enforcement. Following the RCMP getting into some trouble, and the McDonald's Commission was struck, and they said, we want to take away some of those responsibilities from the RCMP.
So you mentioned knocking on doors. The earlier part of the book is really about your experience starting out as an intelligence officer. And it was interesting. I never really thought about what that role was, but a lot of it is not clandestine. It's not covert. It's you just going to the door and waving a badge in the air and saying, hey, I'm with CSIS, let's talk. And the badge didn't have your real name, but still, you were remarkably transparent to people about what you were doing and what you wanted from them.
It's a very unique experience being a Canadian spy, because you're working, and I'd say I'm working 15 minutes from where I'm from Toronto. I'm working in Toronto, 15 minutes, 20 minutes from where I grew up. I'm knocking on a door and I have a badge and it says CSIS. That's my face. And I called myself Andrew, and I said, my name is Andrew. I'm here from CSIS and I need your help. To a complete stranger, right? And then at night I go out and I see all my friends and family. I lie to everybody I know about where I work and what I do, versus the strangers that I'm completely honest with about where I work, what I'm interested in, and what I need their help with. So it is that funny. It's not a clandestine service. We're introducing ourselves as CSIS intelligence officers to Canadians, asking them for assistance. Which is why I say it's important people know about CSIS, because I said we are operating kind of overtly in town in Canada.
That double life aspect you mentioned, I think, is interesting. I don't mean it to be dramatic, but double life in the sense of you weren't entirely forthright with people in your personal life about what you were doing. And it seemed like there wasn't actually a hard and fast policy that CSIS had on that. I mean, you mentioned, people from CSIS being at your wedding, and the idea that, that's the intelligence table with all the spies over there seems like something that, you wouldn't have in this. And I guess I don't know if it's changed since then, but how hard and fast were the rules versus how much was really just left up to your discretion as an individual?
There's a lot of discretion. I think that was a challenge, and I try to talk about it throughout the book, about who I'm telling, what I'm telling them. I was dating and going out on dates and and I met my wife while I was working there, and at some point I had to tell this woman I was dating that I actually worked for CSIS. I wasn't just kind of a government person. When it came to our relationship got serious. And so you have to figure out, okay, well, how early, is appropriate, or how late. Then you said, well, you've been lying to me for 6 months. There's kind of this balancing act about what we can say. And obviously, it's for people's protection. Like the idea is that we're out in public talking to folks, and we don't want everyone to know that we're CSIS, because the people we're talking to are then associated with CSIS, and it's for their protection. That's why we might have different names, and didn't have Facebook or Twitter, because we didn't want people to be connected with me on social media, because that would say, oh, why are they connected with so and so? It was to create a bit of a barrier and protection for those folks who were working with us, to give them some protection. But it does create challenges in your life. I say, what did I put on my JDate profile when I was trying to meet people? And if you put, I work for government in Ottawa, that gets a lot of questions. So you have to kind of play around with that, where you are and what you're writing.
Yeah, I mean, I love it, because I don't know how I managed to find a woman that was in love with me and wanted to marry me, and I'm very grateful I did. But you had to, when you were dating, take the most interesting thing about you off the table, and you had to get women to fall for like a government bureaucrat in some nondescript office. And then once they got past that, then you can drop the interesting stuff on them.
Yeah, although sometimes it went well, and sometimes I didn't tell a lot of people, but it was frustrating sometimes where I'm sitting at a date and he's like, I promise you I'm cool, or much cooler than I'm letting
Yeah.
on. But just seeing I work for the government and trying to get their eyes to glaze over so I can change the topic.
Yeah, there's one part of the book where I found it quite interesting, and I don't know how many incidents you had like this, where you met someone at a party and you knew that they were going to be at the same place that you were later on for what was an undercover operation, and you had to break your cover to them and say, okay, listen, I'm with CSIS, don't talk to me when you see me later.
Well, it happened, a few times, but the big one was an airport. I was having brunch with some people who were in town, and then it just came up. I said, "Oh, I'm traveling tonight," and I knew I was going to be at the airport working that night. And of course, if you see someone, have lunch with them during the day, and then see them at the airport, they would say, "Well, why didn't you mention that you were going to be flying somewhere, or what are you doing here? Where are you going?" And I just couldn't have that interrupt the operation. So I had to pull them aside and say, look, you may see me tonight, at the airport, and this is why, and so I'm working. And if you do, just please don't come over and say anything. But of course, now I freaked them right out, because they're saying, why are you at the airport? What's wrong with I said, nothing's wrong. But just, if you do see me, please don't come and talk to me, and we can talk about it later.
So in your career at CSIS, you did a lot of the community liaising that we were talking about earlier, and you also did special operations, which gets into the airport realm. But I also want to set expectations here. I think the word overtime appears more in the book than the word gun does. So you're dealing with a lot of bureaucracy in this organization, and you're dealing with, at times, also dealing with other agencies, someone maybe under a police investigation and also a CSIS investigation. How much was the administration and the bureaucracy of this really front and center in what you were trying to do, which was, stop the bad guys?
CSIS is a government organization, part of the public service. It's a big bureaucratic machine, and I don't say that it's bad or that it's good. That's kind of what it is. We want our organizations to have some controls and oversight, and I was a part of that. One of the things I wrote about in the book, and I wanted to say, was for the first 2 years of my career, I was one of those kind of behind the desk human source policy reviewers. I was an administrator, essentially part of that machine, making sure that everybody was adhering to policy and following the rules. So it's a huge part of your day-to-day existence there, is managing that bureaucracy, getting plans approved, getting invoices signed off on, and making sure that everything you're doing is kind of within the bounds, and there are people who check up on it. I was when I watch a James Bond movie, and I go, I can't imagine the paperwork that he would have to do to blow that. If he blew that thing up, or he had that weapon, all my mind goes to is the forms that he would have to fill out to do the missions that he was doing. So it is ever present in the mind.
Well, you mentioned James Bond, so let's ask a question that I was going to ask at some point anyway. I was probably going to do it near the end, but you brought it up now. What's one thing that the movies get right, and what's one thing that the movies get spectacularly wrong?
One thing, can I go reverse order? I think
Sure,
the movies get right. The movies get wrong is it's not just one person out there running around. I think when I watch James Bond and he's doing surveillance, and he's following somebody from an airport to their hotel, and he does it all by himself without being detected. And I think the number of people that it takes to do things like that, or to coordinate special operations that he would do, it's such a team effort. And the Jason Bourne, the same thing, right? There's one guy, this super hyper competent individual that can go and take out large organizations. It's just not the case. And I hope that comes across in the book, that I relied on people, that we had folks with different talents and skills in special operations, communications analysts. Surveillance is a whole separate skill set that I didn't have, that we needed. So this idea of a team that comes together, it's far more mission impossible than James Bond and Jason Bourne running around, and that it gets right. I mean, it's all for fun. I wish it was more, people sign up and go, I wish it was that suave and debonair and cool, but look, I guess that there are people out there that want to do harm. Like he was out there foiling plots, and maybe those are sensationalized. But we do, it's not a single person running around. We do need people who are out there looking out for us. We do have threats that people find out there are threats out there, and then you get a team together and you go track them down. So as much as the methods, I guess, that they do are sensationalized, and the threats may be sensationalized, we have spies for a reason. We have people who are looking out for us in the shadows, doing some dirty work, not that dirty work, because there are real threats out there. So maybe that's a stretch, but what it gets right is they exist. Maybe not as cool, but.
There was a line in the book that jumped out at me that I wanted to get your thoughts on. You say, we didn't have threat reduction, mitigation, or disruption powers at that time. And you were talking about how CSIS's mandate is about collecting information, analyzing it, retaining it. It wasn't about intervention. It wasn't about we've got to get in and stop this guy. And at the time, I know this changed slightly with Stephen Harper's government, but I'm curious if you can speak, insofar as you're able to speak about it, about how that played out in real life, that idea that, you were seeing something and you couldn't necessarily do anything about it, and you didn't have a mandate to do anything about it.
Exactly. And so the mandate was to investigate threats and advise government, essentially. And then we would investigate threats to Security Canada and advise the appropriate government. Sometimes that's the RCMP, in a very controlled way. And sometimes that is other parts of government. But so every time you go to talk to somebody, every time I knocked on a door, I had to be there to investigate. But you'd see sometimes someone would tweet something or you'd hear something, and you'd want to just go and tell the person, like, hey, knock it out, like knock it off. If I can see this, a lot of other intelligence services can probably see this too, and you're gonna get yourself in a lot of trouble. But that would be considered disruption. Right. If I was doing it solely to try to stop them from doing it, and that was not part of the mandate. So you could go to the person and say, the person's parents say, hey, in an investigative asking a questions, have you seen what your child is posting online? Is this something that you condone? Is this something that you're as investigating these threats to find out in a roundabout way to say, can you help us, help us knock this off? But the threats became very dynamic. If people are back then, remember, it was foreign fighters. So if somebody says, I'm getting on a plane in a couple hours, well, you can advise government, but maybe there's things that we need to be able to do a little quicker in a controlled way. And that's where those change. So I think it was a challenge when you have this information and you're not able to act on it because of the mandate. And sometimes, required some quick acting from somebody. So that's what they did. And I wasn't around for that to see how it's played out. I'm super curious, I guess, where that's been used and if it's been used effectively, because, I could see the benefits of it, right? Which is, well, can we cut out a few layers here and just do something very quickly to stop something bad from happening?
When you were in the service, how well did Canada manage the interagency aspect of it? It would be mainly with the RCMP, I'm assuming, but perhaps some local police departments. How well did they play, if you will?
It was a struggle at times. I wasn't very involved, but I found it from anecdotally, it kind of changed a lot regionally. If you had a good relationship on the ground, with your local contacts, if you were able to share in a very limited way. CSIS was often considered a black hole of information. No one liked to play with us because we weren't able to share a lot of things, and people assumed, rightly or wrongly, that we had more information that we were not able to give up. And our concern was, well, we don't want to get in the way of an RCMP investigation. If we were to hand over information that would not help them, that would cause problems. So there's a tension there. Sometimes that's healthy and sometimes it's not. I wasn't involved in those conversations at a very high level. I think if it's one thing from the book, I was more on the ground day to day, and those conversations somebody else would comment on them. But my impression, it was very much dependent on relationships and how people are able to act and talk, often geographically, right? If you're dealing with your local RCMP contacts.
You had police called on you, though.
Yeah.
Like that's the irony, is that you're there from the government, and someone says, I don't trust this government guy. I want the other government guy to come.
Well, that's it, and I'm not the only one. It happens all the time. If you call, you can imagine the day of CRA scams and window duct cleaners. I call someone on the phone. I say, hello, my name is Andrew. I'm calling from CSIS, and I'd like to meet you for coffee. And I can't tell you why over the phone. I promise you, I will explain everything. I'll show you my badge when we meet for coffee at whenever it is. Like, obviously people are healthily skeptical of that. So you would have police get called on you. If you're knocking at a door, and I talk about in the book, I'm knocking at a door late night. It was very, very important. I had to speak to the person. I knew they were home. They were not answering their door. And I thought that they couldn't hear me because the laundry machine's on. So I'm banging on this door. I'm banging loudly, and they call the police. 4 police cars come down the street. And of course I have to show my badge to the police, and we have a big powwow in the driveway, and the garage door opens up, and this very frightened guy who's had someone pounding on his door for an hour, he looks out, and the police turn him, you got to talk to this guy. He say it's important. Now he's, what did I do? What did I do? I thought the police were here to help me. So yeah, they were very helpful. We used to, if people didn't believe who we were, we would sometimes ask the police to vouch for us. So at the ground level, you're working as a team, but we're trying to be discreet. So if we can avoid that kind of attention, we try to do that.
I think one of the largest criticisms that I see, and it's a criticism I've made in some ways in the past of Canadian intelligence, is that there seems to be an awful lot of reliance on American intelligence. One notable example is Aaron Driver, the young man from not far from where I live, Strathroy, Ontario, who was intercepted. And this one did sound like a very dramatic, movie-like interception at the last minute, but it was a tip from the FBI that came through Canada to the RCMP. And on one hand, you want that cooperation and collaboration. But on the other hand, is this Canada getting lucky time and time again when we get tips from foreign agencies that are picking up stuff that we're not?
Well, I'll tell you, Canada, I think we punch above our weight for what we are and what our mandate is, and that we're a domestic intelligence service. People love working with us. We often get asked from the Americans and others for assistance. With their investigation. So we're working very collaboratively, but we don't have a foreign intelligence service, right? So that is a limitation. We are able to do some things abroad and collect information abroad as it pertains to threats to Canada, but many other countries have a foreign domestic, and I don't even know if we need one, if our mandate allows for us to do it in a sufficient way. But being next door to the Americans with this huge, with what they have, we're always going to be net importers of information. We're not going to compete in that way. So I don't know if we should necessarily try, but yeah, we're in the Five Eyes community. We work very closely with the Americans, the British, Australians, and the New Zealanders. But just by scale and size and our limited footprint abroad, that's just the way it's kind of going to be, and we benefit greatly from our relationship with the Americans. They obviously do have a lot of coverage and are happy to share and work with us.
Let's talk about some of the fun stuff here. Your special operations chapters I thought were really, really exciting to read. And one of the notable things that really jumped out is you talked about the training you went through when you were going into the intelligence officer program at first and then later on in special operations. And I can't remember the exact wording, but the trainer basically said to you, we're not trying to trip you up. The real world has its way of doing that. And you talked about on a training exercise like a cat escaping a house, and at another point dog poop was like interfering with it, and this was not like you being put through an obstacle course deliberately. Life just does this. And I was wondering if you could talk about that, how there are certain things that just happen in the field that you couldn't plan, you couldn't script, and you couldn't necessarily have a plan for if you tried.
If I could go back and answer the James Bond question, which is one thing to get wrong, or all these shows get wrong, is that the plans go as scripted. The plans never go as scripted. Something always happens. And I say in the book, so our trainer, a grizzled veteran of hundreds of special operations, and special operations for those listening is when a target individual reaches a threshold of investigation, warrants, we were allowed to apply for warrants to do what we call technical surveillance, which would be maybe implanting
James Bond never needed a warrant. Jack Bauer never needed a warrant.
I mean, I think about that all the time. But we then get approvals to do more, we'd say, technical surveillance or close access. We break into places, try to plant devices, look for information in places where individuals would otherwise expect privacy, or that we would not otherwise have the opportunities to go. And so that's what we were doing, as we were going to do those things. And of course, as I said, you plan this operation. Okay, it's going to be late at night and everyone's going to be asleep. We're going to get out of the van. And as we took 2 steps out of the van in training, and my colleague stepped in a huge pile of dog poo. And you obviously cannot break into a house and leave the smell of dog poo all over the place when you weren't supposed to be there in the first place. So you have to go back in the van and trade shoes. But our trainer said, we are not going to mess with you. We're not going to place any arbitrary tricks, traps, anything like that, because we know life finds a way and things happen you don't expect. And every single time, if it was people falling asleep in their front rooms where you think they're going to be asleep, but they fell asleep, where they can see an operational where you're supposed to be operating, a neighbor still up at 3 a.m. watching the Godfather rerun well into the night, or smokers, people out late walking their dogs and smoking constantly, garbage day, people coming out where you don't expect it. It was all the time. And so that is one thing that you don't see, is everyone waiting in a van for an extra hour for the neighbor to fall asleep or the dog to finish going to the bathroom so you can conduct a national security investigation. You talk about overtime, a lot of money racked up waiting for us in vans while we waited for people to go to sleep.
I don't know if there is an answer to this, or if it depends on the person running the operation, but is there a way to measure whether it's worth the risk in real time when things are changing? Or is it really, is there a standardized way of doing that? Or is it basically you have to go with your gut?
Yeah, you kind of lay out what let's say the acceptable level of risk, or what your concerns are. And you talk about this in advance, and then you're playing around within those parameters, right? Which is, we think we need this much time. We have this much time. So it's going to be okay. We won't get caught in the morning. And then your time window narrows where, we had to start late. We're really going to bump up against it. And you're doing a lot of that on the fly. And I say it's all about decision making. When the plans go wrong, how are you able to adjust accordingly? So we think we would have situations where we think that this person parks their car here every night. Every night they park their car here. Every night they park, and then we show up. The car is parked, a few steps over, and it's a little closer to a parking attendant, or a light that was not where was not there. And so you have to say, well, does this impact our risk assessment? Does it impact the cost benefit analysis? Can we come back tomorrow? Is this our one opportunity? You're having those conversations all the time. And that's the tricky part of the special operations. It's not, you do all your planning, and when you throw your plan out the window, would you have enough to fall back on to be confident in your decisions?
One thing as well that the book explains movies get wrong is that it's not one person that has all of the skill sets. It's not one person that's picking the lock, that's hacking the phone, that's planting the bug and doing all of that. And I like the way you described how each of these specialists on your team had their own specialty. This one guy was great at picking locks, and someone else was great at doing this, and so on. And that was also interesting, because these people aren't always as suave and debonair as other people are. Like, some of them are very rough around the edges, it seems like, and you've got to be a babysitter in a way, which I found interesting, because you're talking about people that are doing something very risky, very skilled. They're obviously capable, competent people, but they still need their hand held at times.
Yes. First of all, I'll say the extreme competence in their unique and specific fields. So with locks, we have a guy, that's all he did. He picked locks all day, practice picking locks in the evening. If we need
that's
to get
his
into
name.
a room,
his name was Locks.
We called him Locks. It was not creative, and he was Locks, and he did locks, and he could pick a lock while he was talking to me about what he was having for lunch that day. And that was not a skill set that I had. But so the relationship was, he just focuses on picking locks. So we're walking up to a front door, that's all he's doing. And I'm the one, as a security person, I'm the one looking around to make sure that he can focus on his job. So a lot of it is those specialists who are specialists, that is what they do. And generalists like myself are the ones who are responsible for security, to ensure that they can do their job securely, that they can do their job uninterrupted. And if something goes wrong, they're counting on me to let them know, grab locks or give him a squeeze and say, we got to go, or be quiet for a moment. I want to make sure we're okay. And he, relies on me for that. So there is that the joke. Yeah, we don't let the techs, we call them all, kind of bundle up as techs. The techs don't talk to anybody. We do the talking, and you just do focus on your job. And that there's a healthy tension there with operations, because they know that I can't do what they can do, and I always want them to do it faster and a little bit better. So there's always a special operations tension when we do these things. And I think that, well, it was one thing when I wrote the book. I was very hopeful that the techs didn't rebel against me, that I captured that relationship well without, getting to say, well, come on, man, you couldn't do anything we could do. Don't always tell us our gear doesn't work. You couldn't do anything. So
yeah. Well, yeah. Let's talk a little bit about when you're planning an operation, because there were one incident you talk about in the book, or not incident, but one event is having to go and buy a particular car. So you buy a used car and stuff like that. And a lot of people would not necessarily have thought about this, that it's not just the 2 hours you might be on a street, but in many cases, days, weeks, possibly months of planning. And I was thinking about this. You would have to have, presumably, like an entire other identity when you're going out and procuring this stuff. You need to be in a particular mindset. Why are you buying a car? Why are you buying this, construction outfit or something like that?
It kind of depends on what you're getting. If you're going to Costco or Best Buy and just buying something that's innocuous, but you're going to use it for a special operation. But if you're going to procure a vehicle, so for example, we're trying to get a car. If you're going to do a job, the techs, in their defense, they want to practice. They might have 10 minutes to do their operation. Mm-hmm. They don't want to walk up to a car without having ever seen what the inside looks like, so we try to get them practice vehicles or things that they can test on, so they're not walking up cold to that environment. So we'd have to go, and if it could be buy a car or borrow a car or rent a car, or in one case I was going to go to my brother and borrow his car.
So the CSIS budget is going to be very high if there's a year where they've got to break into a bunch of Mercedes and
big problems. That is it. We try to do it. Look, we're bureaucratic organization. We have budgets, and you can't go, hey, you know what? I just want to go and take this car and take it apart and we'll throw it out. I'm sure our budget's there. One thing the movies don't get is the budget constraints. So if we can borrow something, if we can go and ask somebody, in some cases you're going as CSIS, hi, my name is Andrew, I'm here from CSIS. Can I borrow your car for a week? I promise to give it back to you. I can't tell you what it's for. I can't give you a piece of paper that says, Andrew from CSIS has my car. I just need your help, need you to trust me. And I promise you to get it back in one piece. And people do. Like the other neat thing, and I hope I came across in the book, is that we were constantly asking people for ridiculous things, like, can I borrow your car for 4 days?
Can I borrow your house?
Can I borrow your house? I need your house. I need you to get out of your house. You cannot be there when I'm there running this operation. I will pay for your dinner and a movie. I don't have much more money than that, and I really appreciate it. And people would do it. It's an amazing thing. So that also is really appreciated. I wanted people who cannot in any way, they're not supposed to say that they let CSIS borrow their house or CSIS borrow their car, or that they talk to CSIS anyway. They also don't get acknowledged for their help. And I think, it's okay to say, hey, thanks. We really, really appreciate that. It's extremely helpful. It's legitimate. Now, I hope people on the listening don't go out and start pretending to be CSIS and make a fake badge and run around and go stealing cars. There are ways to verify, but yeah, we were constantly asking the public for assistance in kind of unique and funny ways, and they would come through. It's like heartwarming when I think about all the people that asked for help and that they did it.
I know you were given an alias, which was what you operated as, not just publicly, but even internally at CSIS with your colleagues, as I understood it. And I'm curious how sort of integrated that was. Like, did you have a driver's license and credit cards under that name as well, or was it just your business card and your badge?
I can't get too much into that, but what I can say is that occasionally I would use working name and alias once again to create some distance from the people who that I would meet, that if it should ever get out that I was, an intelligence officer, that they would have some distance from that they couldn't, connect with me online and those types of things. How that kind of worked is, I'd say I'd probably get in a lot of trouble for talking about that. So I can't get too much into it, but I said, my name is Andrew. I was mostly known as Andrew. It's a pretty generic, I'd knock on a door and say, my name is Andrew. I'd have a different last name, but it wasn't overly elaborate, and where I could operate under my real name, I did. I don't like lying to people. So I didn't have a real complicated backstory. If someone said, are you, married? That's, yeah. Do you have kids? Yeah. I just found it easier to keep my story straight than this other Andrew was this person and I was this person. And so, that when I would meet people, they might not know my real name, but they know most other things about me. And because you're trying to build rapport, you're trying to ask people for assistance. I felt that was important. The name was kind of the, once again, for kind of protecting myself and protecting them as well.
Why couldn't you include your alias in the book? That was the one thing that jumped out at me, because you're no longer working there. You're obviously publicly acknowledging you worked at CSIS. Why was that still not something you were able to or comfortable sharing?
I thought a lot about it, actually. And at the end of the day, I just kind of made a decision to take it out. This was the first CSIS memoir written by an intelligence officer about working there. And maybe down the road, someone will do it and the next person will do it and everyone else will do it. I was trying to be maybe cautious in that respect, not knowing, there's no formal way to vet a memoir. So in CIA, you can submit it to a review agency. I think most other services do. We don't. So as much as I was trying to get some feedback from ex-colleagues and others, I didn't know if I was getting in trouble. I joke at the end of the book. I said, my hope is that I don't go to jail for this. And I didn't want to go to my publisher and say it's a 2-book deal, and the second book is from prison.
Your jailhouse memoirs, yeah.
Yeah. So I just, maybe there I erred on the side of caution. There are absolutely people out there who have met me look, I was a candidate in 2018, right? So I left CSIS and I worked under my alias, and then there were posters of me and my real name in subways around my neighborhood. So yes, people would know me by my alias. There are people out there who would. I said there was one thing I thought, you know what, I'm not gonna test it.
Let's talk a little bit about, in our closing moments here, your post-CSIS life. Obviously, you went into politics. I know you run a security consulting agency right now. What are the practical guidelines, or what's the practical advice you'd give people about how to protect themselves? Not just, I don't want to over-dramatize here and say that we all have to protect ourselves against a terror threat any day, but you know what I mean? There are threats out there, cyber threats, even just in general, people that might be up to no good around us. How can people protect themselves?
It's a great question. And obviously there are kind of specific, people have unique specific challenges. I'm happy to discuss them. I think on the cyber front, we have to stay vigilant. So let me start with this. There are absolutely threats and risks out there. I think as Canadians, sometimes we get in this mindset that, oh, we live in a safe country. What does anyone want from me? I have nothing of any value. If they hack me, it's okay. Well, no. We all have things of value. We have assets of value. We have that, you get your home broken into. They might not take things of value. That's incredibly makes you feel violated. And so we want to maintain our safety and security. You have things of value. Cyber wise, if you are compromised, think about everybody you're connected to on Facebook, LinkedIn, the most I'd say technically illiterate colleague, friend, family member you have is now vulnerable to any scammer who's going to use your accounts to get to them. So first, let's all acknowledge that we have assets, we have information, we have things of value that are important. So identify what those things are. If you're online banking, make sure your passwords, that we have appropriate security in place around them. So identify your critical assets, that you have them, assess the security you have around those assets, and then be vigilant that you are appropriately secured. Right. And so you don't have to go overboard. I'm certainly one that says we can't make it overly complicated, but we do have things we should do a base level protection around those things. Some people have more, some people have, varying degrees. Companies, absolutely. So that's kind of the broad strokes what I do. So I joke in my I used to break into places, and now I help companies identify and secure those vulnerabilities that I used to exploit when I was out there trying to get it into places. And so if anyone wants to chat about that, what those vulnerabilities are, we're happy to do it. And if people think they don't have threats, look, we do this stuff too, and we're the good guys. So you better believe there are bad guys out there who are targeting us for a number of things that we need to keep ourselves safe.
I don't think it came up on the book, and I'm confident this might be one of those I can't talk about it, but I'll go wild anyway. Alarm systems. This was something that I'm assuming there was a way to get around, but how useful are they as an individual who has one in their home?
Well, they're not. They're definitely useful. We talk about security. We talk, and I'm going to get the 5 Ds. It's what's it? Deter, detect, delay, disrupt, and defeat. So all these systems that we have, cameras that help deter, they help detect. Alarm systems definitely detect, so that you can then disrupt an activity in place. Like, these are all very, very helpful. Certainly things, every security, even locks, even with the toughest lock can be picked or broken. It just might take a lot longer. So if you have a more secured lock in there, then somebody with more skill and experience is going to be needed to break into it than your average person who just kick the door in. And that delay you're trying to create by having having an alarm system needs to be defeated, having a tougher lock is going to give you more time to respond. So these things all work together. Cameras too. You get broken into, maybe the cameras didn't deter the person, but you can go review them afterwards and give them to police to defeat and get your stuff back. So layering these tools around, it's just a way to keep to work together to keep safe. So I wouldn't say useless, and on their own, obviously useful, but they need to work for a reason.
I don't know how well or if I would fit into a CSIS special operations unit, but the one skill I do have that I wish more people did was just generally a situational awareness. I find a lot of people just, when they're walking down a street, just are not paying attention to what's around them. Whereas for me, I'm probably paying attention too much to what's going on around me, that I'm like, barely talking to my wife if we're walking down a street, because I'm just like, oh, what's that guy? What's that? I hear a car, I feel a person. But I do think that's missing in a lot of cases, especially in the AirPod age. People are walking around just not at all aware that there is a world around them.
Absolutely. I mean, that's what we try to take advantage of, that people's just not paying attention, or, working in plain sight. Your cover is that you belong there, and people look around, you look like you belong, and they don't take any notice of you. Going into buildings, right? Just looking like you belong in that building. People take a look, oh, that person's wearing a blazer. That must be okay, and I'll hold the door for that person. Or like, there is a situation, tailgating, walking with purpose, not signing in places. Absolutely, we take advantage of it, but we used that. Obviously, that was a big part of what we were doing. I mentioned the book. It's like car alarms. Speaking of alarms, I set off numerous car alarms in my day, and the first one is terrifying. You walk it. So locks would say. He said to me, Andrew, I can turn it off, but I can't stop it from going off. So it's going to go off. Your instinct is going to be to run away, but you can't, because people look out their window and they see alarm go off and someone running. That's going to look bad. If they see 2 guys standing there, it's going to look like we're fumbling with our keys, and it's going to look totally normal, right? So yeah, we would try to play on what looks normal, what doesn't. So the first time, sure enough, like the car alarm goes off, you just every part of you wants to bolt. The third, fourth, fifth time, you're a little more comfortable. The locks can turn it off and whatnot. But that's kind of the awareness. You're taking advantage of. Oh, the guy set off an alarm. It's 3 a.m. Should they be there? Should they not? Oh, they look normal. I'll go back to smoking my cigarette or walking my dog.
Well, it's a fascinating book. I'm glad you wrote it. I'm glad you're in a position where you're able to talk about it. I Was Never Here, My True Canadian Spy Story of Coffees, Code Names, and Covert Operations in the Age of Terrorism. And we didn't get into it, but I Was Never Here. You literally wore T-shirts that said that on Operations, and you bought the shirt from Winners, as I understand it.
That's right. Under my hooded sweatshirt, but that was my lucky T-shirt. t-shirt. And my wife knew when I was going out late at night, sometimes you go out just to see a neighborhood, but when I put on my lucky, she's like, "Oh, you're working tonight." You know, it was a bit of a giveaway. My "I was never here" t-shirt. You know, no one will ever, don't get caught, and get home okay. So yes, that's why we named the book "I Was Never Here."
I love it. Well, it's a great book. Andrew Kirsch, thank you so much for coming on today. Great to talk to you.
Thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
That was Andrew Kirsch. The book you can see up on the screen there, I Was Never Here, My True Canadian Spy Story of Coffees, Codenames, and Covert Operations in the Age of Terrorism. So much that we didn't get a chance to get to, so I hope you do buy the book and read the book and enjoy the book, as I did. That does it for us. We will be back next week with more of Canada's most irreverent talk show here on True North. This is the Andrew Lawton Show. Thank you, God bless, and good day to you all.
Support the program by donating to True North at www.tnc.news.